The courtroom was silent, a heavy tension blanketing the air as Judge Harper adjusted her glasses and glanced over the room. The case had gripped the nation. A black man framed by white cops, only for it to be revealed in the most shocking twist imaginable that the man they had tried to destroy was a high-ranking CIA operative. Colonel Adrian Blackwood had spent his life in service to his country. At 42 years old, he was a decorated CIA general, renowned for his strategic brilliance and unyielding commitment to justice. Adrian wasn't just a soldier, he was a patriot who had spent decades infiltrating criminal networks, dismantling terror cells, and protecting the very freedoms his accusers claimed to uphold. But none of that mattered the night he was pulled over by officers Derek Wallace and Brad Mitchell. It had been an ordinary evening in the affluent suburb of Crestwood Hills. Adrian was on his way home after attending a gala honoring veterans, an event that had brought together service members, dignitaries, and community leaders to celebrate the sacrifices made by those in uniform. The room had been filled with a sense of camaraderie and pride, with stories of valor shared over clinking glasses and heartfelt speeches. Adrian had even taken the stage at one point, receiving a standing ovation as he recounted a particularly harrowing mission that saved countless lives. Dressed in a sharp navy blue suit adorned with his military medals, he had been the picture of respect and dignity. As he shook hands with fellow veterans and posed for photographs, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. It was a night that reminded him why he had dedicated his life to service, a stark contrast to the nightmare that awaited him just hours later. Dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, his military medals gleaming on his chest, he was the picture of dignity. His black SUV cruised smoothly down the quiet, tree-lined streets until the piercing wail of a police siren shattered the tranquility. Adrian pulled over, rolling down his window with practiced composure. Wallace approached first, his flashlight illuminating Adrian's calm face. "License and registration," Wallace barked, his tone sharp and accusatory. Adrian complied without hesitation. "May I ask what this is about, officer?" "You match the description of someone involved in a robbery earlier tonight," Wallace replied, his eyes narrowing as he examined Adrian's license. "That's impossible," Adrian said evenly. "I just came from an event. Hundreds of people can confirm my whereabouts." Mitchell joined Wallace, the two exchanging a glance. "Step out of the vehicle," Mitchell ordered. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he obeyed, stepping out with his hands visible. "I hope you realize you're making a mistake," he said, his deep voice carrying an edge of warning. Wallace smirked. "We'll see about that." What followed was a humiliating ordeal. Adrian was handcuffed, his rights ignored, as the officers claimed to find a bag of drugs in his trunk, drugs they had planted. The arrest was swift, the news sensational. A decorated veteran and supposed CIA general accused of drug trafficking. The media pounced, painting Adrian as a fallen hero, but Adrian was no ordinary man. Even in the face of such betrayal, he maintained his composure, knowing the truth would come to light. Adrian sat at the defense table, his wrists shackled, his tailored suit replaced by the orange jumpsuit of an inmate. The weight of the chains felt like an insult, a deliberate attempt to strip him of his identity and humanity. Memories of his years in the CIA flooded his mind, missions where he had faced danger with unwavering resolve, times when his country had relied on his skills to protect lives. Now, that same country seemed to have turned its back on him. He glanced at the faces of the jurors, searching for even a glimmer of understanding, while the stares of some reflected doubt and others, indifference. The shame and humiliation of sitting there, accused of crimes he didn't commit, gnawed at him, but beneath it all was a fierce determination. This wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about exposing a system that had betrayed its oath to serve and protect. Beside him stood his lawyer, Xavier Carter, a sharp-witted defense attorney known for taking on high-profile cases involving racial injustice. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Xavier began in his opening statement, his voice steady but impassioned. This case is not just about Colonel Adrian Blackwood. It's about a system that allows corruption and prejudice to thrive. My client is not only innocent, he's a victim of a calculated smear campaign by those sworn to protect and serve. The prosecution relied heavily on the planted evidence and the testimony of Wallace and Mitchell, who presented themselves as diligent officers doing their job. But Xavier was prepared. Over weeks of meticulous cross-examination, he dismantled their narrative piece by piece. "Officer Wallace," Xavier said, pacing the courtroom, "can you explain why the body cam footage from that night conveniently cuts out during the alleged discovery of the drugs?" Wallace shifted uncomfortably. "Technical malfunction," he muttered. "Interesting," Xavier replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "And yet, every other part of the footage is perfectly intact. How do you explain that?" Wallace had no answer. The turning point came when Xavier revealed the bombshell Adrian had been waiting to drop. The courtroom gasped as Xavier played an audio recording a conversation between Wallace and Mitchell, unknowingly recorded by Adrian's car's advanced security system. "We've got to make this stick," Wallace was heard saying. "If we nail him, it'll send a message." The jury's faces were a mix of shock and disgust as the recording continued, exposing the officer's plan to frame Adrian out of jealousy and deep-seated prejudice. But the real explosion came when Xavier called Adrian to the stand. Despite his shackles, Adrian stood tall, his voice steady as he recounted his career and the events of that fateful night. "I've spent my life defending this country," Adrian said, his voice resonating with conviction. "I've faced enemies abroad and fought for freedoms many take for granted. But never did I think I'd face such betrayal from within. What these officers did wasn't just an attack on me, it was an attack on the very principles they swore to uphold." The courtroom was silent as Adrian's words hung in the air. Even Judge Harper seemed moved, her stern expression softening. Outside the courtroom, the case had taken on a life of its own. Protesters gathered daily, their voices growing louder as more damning evidence came to light. Signs reading "Justice for Adrian" and "End Police Corruption" filled the streets, creating a sea of indignation and hope. At one rally, an elderly woman took the microphone, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've lived through the civil rights movement, and it pains me to see we're still fighting this fight," she said. A young man added, "Adrian's story is my story. This could have been me or my brother. Chants of 'We believe you, Adrian' echoed across the city, amplifying the pressure on the justice system to act. Journalists uncovered a pattern of misconduct by Wallace and Mitchell, linking them to other questionable arrests that disproportionately targeted Black residents. The scandal rocked the police department, leading to internal investigations and the suspension of multiple officers. Meanwhile, Adrian's story became a symbol of resilience, inspiring people across the nation. Letters poured in from strangers who shared their own stories of injustice, many describing how Adrian's courage gave them hope. One young woman wrote, "Seeing you stand tall in the face of such betrayal has made me believe in fighting for what's right." At community gatherings, people began sharing testimonials recounting how Adrian's plight had spurred them to take action organizing protests, petitioning for police reform, or simply opening dialogues about systemic racism within their own circles. His story became a catalyst for change, a reminder that even in the darkest times, one person's bravery could ignite a movement. Former colleagues from the CIA, including his commanding officer, came forward to vouch for his character, painting a picture of a man who had risked everything for his country. Their testimonies added weight to Xavier's argument, forcing the jury to confront the stark contrast between Adrian's integrity and the officers' corruption. As the trial neared its conclusion, Wallace and Mitchell's defense began to crumble. Under pressure, Mitchell broke down on the stand, admitting to the frame-up in exchange for a plea deal. His confession was the final nail in the coffin, sealing the fate of both officers. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours before returning with a verdict: not guilty. The gallery erupted in cheers, Adrian's supporters embracing one another as tears streamed down their faces. But Adrian wasn't done. With Xavier's help, he filed a civil suit against the department, demanding accountability and systemic reform. The case sparked a national conversation about police misconduct, racial profiling, and the abuse of power. Adrian's vindication was not just a personal victory, it was a rallying cry for justice and a catalyst for real change. Following the trial, multiple cities launched investigations into similar cases of police misconduct, leading to a wave of reforms. Local governments implemented mandatory body camera usage, increased funding for implicit bias training, and established independent oversight committees to review complaints against officers. Adrian's testimony before Congress further amplified the movement, inspiring legislation aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within law enforcement agencies. His actions proved that one person's fight for justice could ignite a nationwide push for reform, leaving an indelible mark on the system. And as he stood on the courthouse steps, addressing the crowd of supporters, his voice was firm and unwavering. "We cannot let this be the end," he said. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but together, we can build a system that truly serves and protects. I will not stop fighting, not for me, but for everyone who's been wronged by a broken system." The crowd roared in agreement, their chants of justice for Adrian echoing into the evening sky. Adrian looked out at the sea of faces, a sense of hope swelling in his chest. He had been through hell, but he emerged stronger, ready to continue the fight for a better tomorrow. Adrian's story is a stark reminder of the work that remains in the fight for justice and equality. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about systemic racism and the abuse of power. But it also serves as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of truth. Let this story inspire us all to stand up against injustice, to hold those in power accountable, and to work tirelessly toward a future where every individual is treated with dignity and respect. The fight is not over, but together we can make a difference.